Welcome to session 2 on day 2 of WP Campus. This morning in the auditorium, we have a workshop presented by Roy Sivan, who is a WordPress developer and has been using WordPress since version 0.7. He's worked all over the place, but currently works for Disney, writing code for WordPress and other web applications. Hi, Roy.
No? Can the live stream? Well, they can't respond to me. All right. So, where was I? Yeah, I've been using WordPress a long time. Mainly a developer, did some SEO for a long time, and a user. I mean, I have a couple blog websites. I currently work at the Walt Disney Company. If any of you guys have seen any of our blog websites, like Oh My Disney, Babbel, or I think Disney Family, or StarWars.com, or anything like that, those are the sites that I get to work on. Not really Star Wars as much as I like, but hopefully. I'm also a WP Crowd member, if you can see my shirt, although it's a little clipped right now. WP Crowd is a WordPress blog podcast little community that we run. Feel free to see anyone with a WP Crowd shirt. Feel free to say hi. RoySivan.com is my personal web address. That's where I blog, although not as often as I like anymore. And you can find me pretty much anywhere online at RoyBoy789. So, unfortunately, a little while ago, someone started this thing. And over the past couple days, people have been using it. So I feel like I have to say hi back to everybody who has said hi to me over the past couple days, including Sean Hooper, Mike Corkum, Code Aaron, where are you at? Code. Oh, it's Coder Aaron. Sorry, I was looking at my computer screen very late at night last night. Chris Wigman, Joy Treats, Web Elaine, Mantelope Musk, and WP Campus. So let me ask a few questions here, and you guys can just raise your hand and then keep them raised as I go down the list. How many of you use JavaScript in some form right now, whether it's jQuery, a framework, anything, any JavaScript? All right. Keep your hand up if you've built a plugin, just any plugin for WordPress. Yeah, if you haven't built a plugin, put your hand down. Keep your hand raised if you have used NPM. Okay? And lastly, if you've used Gulp, Grunt, or any other task build management tool. All right, so anyone who's not raising their hand right now, do you see everyone raising their hand? That's who you're going to ask questions to, not me. All right, so what are we building? We're building something pretty cool. So about a month or so ago, I asked a few of my friends on WP Crowd what I should build, because I do a lot of building of random things, but I don't work in higher ed. And I'm like, how can I communicate to the higher ed space with my code? What should I build? So we're going to build something pretty cool. I'll show you a demo in a second, just so you can see what the goal is. It's going to be a live notification system. So basically, let's say you have 1,000 people on your website currently, like active people viewing your website, and you need to send them all a message, like whatever it might be. You need to send them a notification via a banner. you just type in the message, and all 1,000 people that are on your website will get a banner popped up from their window. It's going to use WebSockets. It's going to use Angular for the application. And then you can change it as you go, turn it off. We're going to add some extra custom data, and I'm going to show you how to continue configuring it so you can add more data and then apply that styling and stuff like that to it. It's all going to be live, so again, it's all basically anyone who's on the website will see it pop up right away. If they come to the website after you turn it on, it'll still be there. And then you could turn it off and it'll go away for everybody. We're going to be using AngularJS. From the title of my talk might suggest. We will be using WordPress, because if I wasn't, I don't know why I'm talking here. We will not be using Mongo, so if you are a big MongoDB fan, you can just go away. I had to put in Carl 2016 because his face is right there, and I love him. So I'm going to demo it really quick just to show you what we're building, and then we'll go from there. So this is the WPCrowdcom. I have a banner on it right now. I have an incognito running just because if I'm logged in, you can see the WordPress admin toolbar. I didn't feel like turning it off, so I'm just having an incognito window for that. And here I am logged in on the other side with my little application running. So I can just turn this off, and it'll go away. I can turn it back on, and it'll turn on. And if any of you are on your laptop right now, and you go to the WPCrowd.com, you will see this. So let's say I wanted to do something else, like, hi, I'm talking in front of a bunch of people. It'll just update. And again, that updates to anyone that's currently on the website, wherever they are in the world. It's all WebSocket connected, it's all live, so everyone gets updated. So I'm going to turn this off for now, since we don't really need it. All right. Did everyone understand how that thing worked? No. Yeah, question. If you're caching, you'll have to bust your cache one time just because we are going to include injection of HTML. But then once it's there, it'll just continuously run because it's all client-side. All right, so what do you need to know to work, like build out this thing? REST API, I wrote that because like everything I do is with the REST API, and then like this morning I was like, wait, we're not actually using the REST API in this thing. But, you know, it's good to know the REST API, so like you should learn it anyway. And if you don't know what it is, have you seen Josh Pollock speak? Because he was speaking yesterday about it. So if you haven't, you should go back in time and watch him. AngularJS, before anyone asks, we're going to be using 1.x instead of Angular 2. I haven't had the time to sit down and learn Angular 2, and I find that Angular 1 is a little bit easier for someone who hasn't used Angular at all yet. The syntax is a little bit cleaner. It's a little bit more reminiscent of like HTML like 1. Like it's really basic of HTML that gets you going. So on the template side. I'm going to get more into Angular in a second, but yeah, I am using 1, not 2. If you want to know more about 2, I'm going to probably re-release this in 2 once I learn it. JavaScript and general knowledge is going to be helpful, whether you do vanilla JavaScript, jQuery, whatever it is, just to understand the fundamentals of like how JavaScript looks. Of course, I'm going to run through everything and walk you through it, but again, it's going to be really pretty basic, I hope. All right, so what do you need? You're going to need command line access. If you don't have command line access to run command line things like NPM, don't worry. We can set it up. I can set you up with the final product as a zip, so you just have the plugin to install already good to go, and then you can kind of work backwards from there. A code editor, so I use PHP Storm. I also tend to use Coda from time to time. Whatever you guys use, Code, Sublime, whatever, just to edit your text. Git, so everything I do, I write with GitHub in mind, and I open source everything I can. Obviously, at work, I have to not do that, but everything I do on my free time is pretty much on GitHub. Desktop, if you have the desktop application, it's going to be a little bit easier just to see what you're doing, especially if you're a little bit newer to Git. But again, it's up to you. If you've used it, you probably know what you're doing. A local environment. So there's plenty of resources out there for local environments. I personally use a mix of VVV and I have a local Google Cloud server running. So those are the two I run. But there's desktop server. There's a whole bunch of other platforms out there for running a local environment. I don't want to walk through creating a local environment. That's not what this talk is about. So if you want to do this on like a development site through FTP, you could do that as well. And then an open mind, because you should always have an open mind. All right, so let me talk a little about Angular first, because while most of you probably came to this talk knowing it's Angular and probably were like excited that it's Angular, for someone who might not know why I choose Angular, I'll talk a little bit about it. So according to a current senior software manager at Disney, me, Angular is the best JavaScript client-side framework. Apparently, I don't know how to use commas. Luckily, in code, there aren't many comma usages. Yes, or semicolons. The one thing I love about Angular and why I got into it is it uses HTML templates. So you're going to see basically strict HTML when it comes to the template, which if you are someone who's just getting started in code in general, is going to look really simple. And a lot of developers who are in the WordPress community maybe weren't great developers before they started with WordPress, and WordPress was their kind of stepping stone to become a more advanced developer. I see this all the time. I would say that WordPress helped me level myself up to become a better developer. I think Angular is the platform to use if you want to learn JavaScript better. jQuery is there, and that's not really a framework. It's not an MVC framework. It's a library. But if you want to get into building client-side applications, Angular has kind of like been my go use this and then go learn something else. Like, I'm not saying don't not learn anything else, because there are other good frameworks out there. But I feel like Angular has the least steep learning curve. So you can get from zero knowledge to at least running a single page application very quickly. And then once you have that knowledge down, you know how everything works, you can go, okay, let me try to build the same thing out with React or Backbone, whatever it is you want to use instead. I learned Angular first, then I learned all the other ones. So I dabble in React, I dabble in Backbone, I've learned Knockout, I've learned Ember, I've learned or try to work with at least all of them, but there's so many out there I can't keep up. So it makes great single-page applications. So single-page applications are basically a client-side loading application. So imagine your whole website running within one page of WordPress. So basically you click on new page, you add a page, and then your whole website runs within that page using Ajax to make the calls, and then with the routes, it knows which view to put up. So basically, you can go through a full application, even though you're only loading one page. Similar to many applications already out there, Facebook, Twitter, a lot of them are already single-page applications that already run, and you're using them anyway. And they're just a great tool to build out something really advanced. And with the REST API out there, it's leveraged, it's made it so WordPress can now build out these single-page applications really easily. Another great tool, another great reason to use Angular is you can make phone applications with it. There's a framework called Ionic, which is built on Angular, and it actually lets you take your code and literally port it over to a native iOS or Android app. So you can put those into the store so people can actually download it. And then if you want to just use your WordPress site, there's a cool plugin called AppPresser it'll take all of your data and make a native application for any phone using your WordPress content. I don't want to get into that too much, but that's all powered by Angular. It's really, really cool. All right, step 1. Anyone who's on a computer right now, feel free to just go to roysivan.com/WPCampus. I'll load it up on my screen. All right, so the Git repository is part of my repository. I have a link there. It'll take you to all my repositories on GitHub. I don't know why I didn't link straight to the one I want you to go to. Maybe I'm subconsciously want you to look at all the other ones as well. But yes, just click the first one, Live Notify banner, and that'll take you right into the repo. Is anyone not familiar with Git at this point? Like, don't know how to get the code down? If I continue, will anyone not know how to continue? No? All right, good. So you can do one of two things. You can download the zip and then install a plugin like you normally would. Just go to Add New Plugin and then upload the zip file and it'll install itself. Or you can open it up in desktop, which will clone it to your desktop. I will say that the master branch right here, that's the completed plugin. So if you actually want to follow along, go down to the base. And base is actually where we're going to start. So I have every step as a new branch within my repo, so you can follow along. If you get lost, just update your local to the, or update your code to that whatever branch I'm stepping through, and then you'll be up to date with where I'm at. There's also there's the master branch, and there's also a build branch. If you don't have build tools like Gulp or Grunt, well, this is all done in Gulp, so you're going to have Gulp unless you want to rewrite it. If you don't want to use Gulp, build already has all the build files done. So it has the CSS already compiled. It has all the JavaScript already compiled. So you can just take that, download the zip, and that's actually your completed plugin without having to worry about any build tools. So I'm going to start with base, and I'm going to put this in my desktop. And I'm just going to use my Git client. Put it here. I'm going to clone it. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm on the base branch. All right, step 2. Once you've gotten that done, and if I'm going too fast for people, just raise your hand, tell me. And if you are having issues with anything, it's probably not my fault. But if you are having issues, feel free to ask me a question, and I'll try to help you. Be forewarned, I wrote this code, I tested it, and I made sure it worked, partially. I definitely know the build works, so that's good. But along the way, if there's any errors that come up, I might have to fix them for everybody, so that's fine. But yeah, if you have any errors, either I or someone who already has some knowledge in whatever it is can come up and help you. So what you're going to do is open up a code editor and a terminal window. If anyone, looks like everyone's on a Mac. Anyone on a PC? So if you follow Adam, you already know. If you're on a PC and you're on the live stream, go to Twitter and do @Adam_falafel. It's spelled out just like it sounds. He wrote a great blog post on how to get set up with NPM and everything in Node on Windows. I haven't used Windows in a very long time, and every time I do use Windows, I throw it out the window. And I'm not a Mac I'm not going to tell everyone they should have a Mac, but I just found in my development career it's just been so much easier to just get up and running with a Mac. So yeah, go to Adam_falafel if you're a PC person. Learn how to get up and running with Node on PC from him. So open up a code editor and terminal to the directory. Step 3. I don't really remember what step 3 was, so we'll come back to this one. Step 42. I totally missed we had to code, but yes, profit, but after we code. So I'm actually going to turn off my slideshow and actually start coding with you guys. They always tell me not to live code during presentations. I don't believe that. If it all burns and goes to somewhere, then maybe I'll listen to them. But been lucky so far. All right, so I'm going to open up my PHP Storm. I have a local build. So while most of you have Terminal as a separate application, just because I have limited screen space and the resolution is kind of funky because it's not two screens, I'm just using the same screen and sharing the same screen. I'm just going to use PHP Storm for my terminal. You could type in the same exact things into your terminal window. If you have PHP Storm and you're not using the terminal window built in, you should be. It's great. So all I have to do is to go to my plugins. I now have Live Notify banner there. So I'm just going to drag it in here, close out this one, and boom, I'm already there. So I'm just going to see where I'm at. All right, so I'm on the base branch. I'm going to go into here. Look, it's already activated. All right, so if you activate the plugin and you go to it, nothing's going to happen. It will create the menu for you. It'll set up some of the foundation of the plugin, just really the base part. And that's where I really wanted to start this whole workshop. The tricky thing is, and I'm going to show you guys, is that I said that we're going to be building that Live Notify banner in Angular, and that's going to be the application. I kind of tricked you. We're actually building an application for the admin first in Angular, and then we're going to build an application that is powered by that application for the front end. So there's actually two for the price of one. All right, so I'm going to go. Okay, so the WebSockets, basically the live connection between everything. It's powered by a tool called Firebase. So you don't really need it. You don't really need to create an account right now. But if you actually want to use this, please create an account because I don't want to pay for my account. And if you use my account, I'm going to get charged. And it's already in the code, so I'm not going to take it out. Basically, Firebase is a JSON store database, and it has a cool framework or library that sits with it called AngularFire, which is just the most amazing name ever for anything. AngularFire. Yeah. And it allows a really easy connection to Firebase and actually does the WebSocket for you, so you don't have to actually code out a WebSocket. I wanted to originally do this whole talk and actually teach you how to do WebSockets, but not every server allows for WebSocket connections out of the box. It's a little bit harder with just PHP. So I figured this is just going to be an easy solution. But if you want to take the next step and learn about WebSockets and do it on your own, it's not that. It's a little bit of a step. I will let you know now. There's some cool NPM projects like Sales.js, which is a framework that sits on top of Node, and it has WebSockets built into it. I was playing around with that a little while ago. So you could actually ping that and then have it ping back to your website. Basically, like creating your own little Firebase. I'll log into my Firebase account really quick just so I can show you what it is. Excuse me. For? Honestly, I don't know. I haven't had any problems with anything, so maybe. I don't go to Firebase very often. Everything I use it for, it runs really well, so I haven't had to, focus on anything. So I think it's this one. Okay, remember earlier I was doing the demo, and I made the content change live? Well, it literally it changes this JSON object. I changed it to, I'm talking in front of a bunch of people. And it stores 3 things. Is it active? I turned it off right before I turned off the demo, so it's 0. The text that goes along with it, and then the type. So type is actually going to be an advanced addition of data that we're going to add on. But that's all it is. And basically all of your apps, if you don't change the code as it is, will speak to this JSON object. The way Firebase works, just to give you a little more heads up, it is completely free to use based on users and how many concurrent connections you have. Once you get to a certain amount, it'll stop working. It'll actually not send anything back until you pay for it. So it's actually pretty cool if you have a low traffic site or you're not using the live notification for a lot of people or for a short amount of time. But if you're going to be using it consistently across your site and you want to continuously update it, and you're getting thousands upon thousands of hits a day, then I'd recommend just paying for it. It's pretty cheap anyway. And again, it's an easy solution that just works right out of the box. And it has a thing called AngularFire. So I'm going to go into my code really quick. So I have everything built out. All the code is in assets. It'll eventually, when we build it, we'll go into a build folder. I don't know if many of you recognize how I do things. It's kind of like my developer, just how I do things. Some people might do it something a little bit differently. But yeah, anything that I'm working on that's not built and ready to go and compiled goes into assets, and then it gets built out and put into a build folder. So I have assets includes, which is some extra PHP. This is going to be what enqueues the local object as well as the JavaScript and the styling. And then I also have a localized object. And again, my localized object gets the REST API. We're not using it, so don't worry about it. There is a template directory which is going to come in handy. So the template directory is actually where we're going to store the HTML files. And I know most people are like, why do you have HTML files in your WordPress theme or plugin? That doesn't compute in my PHP lingo. But yeah, we can use HTML. It's pretty cool. So right off the bat, this is what you're going to get. You're going to have live notify app, which is going to equal an object. And this is where the Angular starts. So right off the bat, make sure I'm on the right branch. Yeah, I'm still in base. I've already defined out the app. So okay, there's a laser pointer on this. I want to use. Sweet. So I define out the app right here. This is so cool. I've never got to use the laser pointer before. And then we're going to create 2 things called directives. So directives in Angular are essentially chunks of code or little apps, like let's say micro apps that run within themselves. So like you'll have like your controllers, which are these global controllers, and they run on a screen. But let's say you just want a little piece of functionality and a little widget. That's when you create a directive. And a directive has its own controller, has its own scope, and you can put it anywhere you want. That's the great thing about directives. If anyone's familiar with React, React works in a very similar fashion out of the box, where everything is kind of component-based. You say, hey, I have an HTML element that I've just created called app, and I want it to run this JavaScript and this app with the template file and everything. Directives are just like that, and I think they're moving that way with Angular too, because it's probably one of my favorite things about Angular, because essentially you create a directive, and what it does, it says, okay, I want anything with notify admin. So it's camel case for hyphens. So like the HTML will be notify-admin. Anytime you see that within the Angular application, run this directive. Okay? Does that make sense? Sorry, question? Yeah, go to, sorry, it's assets.js notify-app is what I'm looking at. Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, sorry. It's that file I'm looking at. So there's not much to it right now. Basically what happens is when you have a directive and it finds this HTML element, it runs, and it runs the controller. There's a couple other functions that it will run also, but we just want it to run the controller function. Right off the bat, I want notify to equal 0, and I want the scope object notify to be already in existence. So I want to make sure that off the bat I have this notify object. I haven't touched Firebase yet, I haven't gotten there yet, but I want it to be there, and I want it to just be 0. So that way I know my notify object is not going to be active. I'm going to scroll down to the other one. So I have another directive, which is the notify FED, which stands for front-end development, but anytime I do anything on the front end, I just abbreviate FED. And that's actually going to go onto the front end of the website. And that's what's going to be the banner that everyone sees when they actually go and they log onto your site. Again, nothing really here, just a console log that just says here, just so I know it's running. And then it returns everything, so this thing is a nice little contained object in JavaScript. So I'm going to go to my website now. Oh, why am I injecting it? It's nice to have the $ ready available instead of like, in case I need to use it anywhere. I know Angular has a jQuery built into it, like a light version, but sometimes I still just like using the jQuery by itself, and it's already built into WordPress, it's already getting loaded, and it's just sometimes just a lot easier to use, as well as just easier to teach people with just default jQuery. So yeah, I'm injecting jQuery into the whole thing just so I have it, and it's available to me. So I'm using 2015, a whole bunch of errors, but cannot find, oh, that makes sense because we haven't built it yet. Before I get into that, let me just show you one more thing with the PHP. The main file has a couple of actions that are built into it. I mean, no, stop it. So WPFooter is something I tag into, and I tag it right here. So sorry, you can't. There you go. Cool. So I'm using WPFooter to inject this line of HTML, and you can't see it all, but basically that line of HTML has the ng app. Ng app is actually the container for the whole application. So if you quickly go back to your JavaScript, the notify app, you'll see when I define out Angular, I define it out. The first parameter I put in is the name of my application. That has to match what's in ng-app right here. And then it knows that everything within that div or within that container is now part of that application. So all those directives need to live within that application. Typically, you don't want more than one application on a page. In fact, I think you can't even have more than one application on a page, but sometimes I've seen it work. But try to keep it minimal. It's always easier that way. And then I have some CSS. I'm using Bootstrap for everything. Most people know what Bootstrap is. It's just a UI framework for grids and stuff. So I'm using that, and then it continues on. So right here, right at the very end, you'll see I have an HTML element called notify-fed, and that's that directive. And again, that is not HTML by any means. It's not something you can just put on any website. But because I defined it out within the application of Angular as a directive, it'll know that that's an HTML element that needs to run something. It needs to run that controller function. Yeah.
So in the JavaScript, it's camel case, and there it has the hyphen. Does it knows?
Yeah. So when you're defining out a directive, and you know you want to use a dash or a hyphen in the HTML element, just create a camel case, and it'll know that that's what it's looking for. All right, build time. So the first thing that we're going to do is make sure that we have all of our dependencies that we need. So I'm just going to do an npm install. While that's installing, I'm going to show you what I'm installing. I'm installing Angular as a dependency. Angular-resource, again, because I usually use the API, and that comes in handy, except we're not. So you could actually remove that if you really don't want to. I have Bootstrap running as a dependency, and then everything I need for Gulp. So now that that's all running, or all installed, I can just run the Gulp command, and that'll just run. So what Gulp does right here is it runs through, I'll just open up the file really quick. It runs through a couple of tasks that I've created. And if anyone you have never seen Gulp or you're familiar with Grunt, I just prefer Gulp. I like the syntax better, and it usually runs a little bit faster than Grunt does. So I'm a Gulp fan. I have a list of all the JavaScript files I need. I'm loading in Angular. Again, I'm loading in the resource, although I don't think we're going to be using it. And then my application file. I have a couple of tasks that I run. Sass, which actually builds out the Sass files to CSS. I have JS, which takes this list and then goes ahead and concatenates it into one file and then puts it into my build folder. And then I have a watcher. So watchers are like the awesomest thing ever. And if you don't know what a watcher is, pay attention because they're amazing. Watchers allow you to literally say, watch these files and then do something if you hit save. If I've made a change to a file, run a Gulp task. And I have that by default. So my default task builds everything and then starts watching. So you'll see that it'll be down here. It'll just continue watching. And every time you save a Sass file or a JS file, it'll just automatically build. If you want to get really tricky, install like a live reload, and that'll reload your browser at the same time. I'm just not that cool. I don't want to do that. I'd prefer refreshing on my own.
Bootstrap in the styles Sass file, do you break out the variables so you're not editing like the variables in Bootstrap in the node modules directory?
Yeah, you want to repeat that?
Hi. When you include Bootstrap in the styles.css, do you break out the variables so that you can change them so that when you do like npm update, it doesn't overwrite your changes?
So I have a bootstrap-custom, which styles.css actually imports. It doesn't import the node modules bootstrap. It actually imports my own bootstrap importer. And then I will comment out everything I don't need to avoid bloat. Because I don't need any of this stuff. We're not going to be using it, so I comment it out. In most scenarios, I'll actually then include a variables file, which is just a copy of the Bootstrap variables file. And then I'll have that in my local, like my plugin or my theme. In this case, I'm just going to be using default, so I don't really care. But yeah, typically I put my variables in its own file locally to the project. That way I'm loading that and then everything else from the node package. And then I'll update the variables, which really don't get very updated. It doesn't get updated very often, but I'll update it as I need to. But that way all the variables are there, and then I have them all. That's how I work with it. I also like breaking out my SCSS, as you'll see. I'll have an admin style sheet, front end, and then my Bootstrap. On bigger projects, if you're using Sass, I highly recommend breaking them down even more. So on a theme, I'll do something like header, footer, and anything global in the main Sass directory. And then I'll have either a modules directory within that, which will be like components around the website, like sidebar or pages. So like if I have a homepage specific one, that'll usually be in a subdirectory. It's just cleaner that way. It's easier to maneuver. And then all you have to do is in your styles.scss, you just make sure you import the right file. All right, so here we are back at our application in the admin. I've just hit refresh because I built my files, and now we're kind of getting somewhere. Now it's starting to look like something. When I come back to the front end, I get my console log here with no errors. It means it worked well. So yeah, that means the WPFooter injected the HTML properly. You've included the right JavaScript file. It's enqueued properly, and it's running properly. So that's all you should see at this point. Just a here console log, and on the back end, it should just be pretty much nothing. Just a white screen with notification settings. If you want to edit the admin, which is what we're going to do first, we're not going to touch it too much, but it's in includes -admin menu, _menu, and it's really just that piece of HTML right there. You'll see it corresponds to the live notify, and everything's already there. Okay, so the next step is actually to get our admin going. It's again a developer's preference. I like to get the admin going first, just so all the data's there, and then from the data being there, then I can do the front end. A lot of people actually do the front end first with, like, let's say dummy data, and then they'll do the admin after, and then just update that data. I'm not sure there's one correct way to do it. It's just my preference is just to have the data there first, so build out that part first, and then build out the front end around that data. The only times I will do it the opposite way is if there's a lot of random data and it's not really set in stone. That way you have like at least a data model to go after, and then you can say, okay, I now need to update this piece and this piece and this piece. But I knew exactly what data I needed to update, so I just did the admin first. And that's usually the case, but sometimes, when you're working on projects, it's more of like a organic thing. So let's get started with that. The main updates there are going to come into this app directive. I basically didn't add too much besides a function called update notification. And all it does right now is console log updating. So you might think, okay, well, that doesn't really look much different at all, so what did you actually do? What I did was I actually went to the HTML file for admin, and here, where there was almost nothing before, I've added in a form, and I told that form to submit and run that function. So where's my form? Right there. So, yeah, well, it's within my scope. Angular? Within the scope? It's in the directive. So the directive has the scope around it, and anything within that directive. No. So. Okay, good question. Let's take a step back, and we're going to open up the admin menu, right? So right here I have notify-admin. That's the directive that I'm running with Angular. When the directive runs, it runs that controller file, the controller, and then within the admin, I tell it to run a template. I guess I should have said that earlier. So good catch. It runs a template, which is admin.html. And basically, within anything in admin.html is going to have that scope for Angular. So going back to the admin, now everything I write in that controller for that directive is going to have anything I need from that scope object. So I created a function called update notification. And how many of you are familiar with jQuery and submitting forms that way? So interjecting what a form does by default. Anyone done that before? Okay, or not. So in jQuery, you can interject a form submit. You can say, hey, when I submit a form, when I literally hit a submit button, stop what it's doing and actually do something else, JavaScript. Okay, sorry. So with Angular, you don't actually need to do any of that. You just tell it with this HTML up here, ng-submit, that's what you want to run. So when you hit submit on the function, it's actually not going to like reload the page and do an HTTP request like a form normally would. In this case, it's just going to run this JavaScript function. I wanted to add in my active. So remember, I created a object called notify object called notify, and I created a property of active, and I set it to 0. Well, here I have a select drop-down where I can tag into that, and I have the values of 1 and 0, which would just be yes or no. All that's going to do is say, all right, is my live banner on right now? Just an on-off select drop-down. And then notification text. So why did I do it this way? This ng-model is probably one of the coolest things about Angular that I love so much about it. And it's basically, as you have an object in Angular, so I have an object scope.notify, right? So anything that I have in the directive, I have access to. Now, anytime I update from the front end, that variable, in this case, is going to be an object, it'll update the scope automatically. So basically, you automatically have a connection to the JavaScript at any given time, and you can update that object at any given time. And that's what I like about it. There's a couple other frameworks that, they're very similar, but you'll have to update them manually when you change the front end. In Angular, it's when I first saw this, when literally someone had like an input field and the object or the variable being spit out and echoed out, and whatever you put into the input field updates what it's echoing, I was like, that's amazing. And it is amazing because essentially you are now communicating with JavaScript directly. You're saying, no, I don't like the way what this is defined as, let me change that. And you can change it from the front end. The only reason I like defining it first out in JavaScript is that way there's some they're basically your defaults. They're what it's going to start loaded out with. Let me just make sure I got everything. Yeah, so I added some styling in at this point. So again, styling is up to you guys. I'm a horrible designer. I'm a developer by trade. I don't design things. So it's going to be the most horrible design ever. And you should just expect that. Why? Because it functions well, and that's all I care about. So yeah, feel free to play around with the stats as you want. I don't really care about it. It functions, and it does what I want it to. I did include a little bit of an animation via CSS, so it slides down, slides up. That's about as tricky as I'm going to get with you. All right, I'm going to go to my next step. All right, here's where things get connected to Firebase. So part of So at this point, I actually changed the package. So you'll have to get out of your watcher by doing Control-C, and then do another npm install. So in this time, the only difference is I included something called AngularFire. And I know I've already said AngularFire, but I'm going to say it 10 more times because it's AngularFire. It's so cool. I've included it into the package. So when you do the npm install, AngularFire is now part of everything. And you don't have to worry about getting the minified version off some CDN. You have it locally. So I did npm install. I have that. I'm just going to do gulp again. Not there. And we're going to start working with Firebase. So when you define out an Angular application, so app equals angular.module right here, you're allowed to inject other things. So if you have a library or an API that you have as part of your system, you can say, hey, Angular, I want to create an injectable for you. And you create a library, you tell someone to include the JS file, and boom, they have an injectable right here. So I inject it into the application. I then need to bring it into my controller. So these are all injectables of Angular. And an injectable is just like a global object, whatever variable. It's just something that you can use pretty much anywhere. And it does whatever it is you want it to do. You can create them in your application if you need to through services. We're not going to be doing any of that. That's pretty advanced. If you want to talk about that later, feel free to find me. But we're going to bring in this Firebase object. I'm going to go ahead and copy. I literally copy-pasted from the Firebase documentation how to get my Firebase object going and save it as an object. And then I put into, after it's loaded, if notify. So you go to Firebase, you say, okay, here's the object. And then scope.notify. Remember scope.notify, which we just had as active 0? I tell it, no, I actually want it to be that Firebase object right here. So it's pretty simple. That's all you need to do. These 2 lines of code connect your scope object to Firebase. That's all. There is one more step that you could take to actually bind Firebase to bind it together, which we will do. But on the admin, I actually binded it at first. And then what I didn't like was that as you were typing out, let's say you change your text message, like the message, anyone who's on your website would see you typing it out. So I was like, well, that might not be good. So in this case, I'm gonna actually forcibly, my update notification function, which I created, that's actually gonna force the update instead of a bind connection. Because again, if you have a binded connection or a bound connection, as you're writing typos in your notification, every single student who goes to your school that's on your website is gonna see it. So yeah, that's all you needed for Firebase. And that's why I love AngularFire so much. It does it so quickly and so cleanly. Right here, you'll see my update notification function again. And again, I just do a save command, which is part of AngularFire. Yeah. You have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, I have a question about Firebase versus using something like Ajax to get and send that information back and forth. Can you kind of talk about what Firebase would do? Okay.
Yeah. So Firebase is on the front end. You'll see this, and I was talking about binding, right? So I said when you're typing out, it'll update the banner live. Firebase is a direct connection. So you have your database on one end, right? And you have your website with people on it are over here. And an Ajax call goes from here to the database and then sends the data back. With WebSocket, the connection is constant. So as data is being updated in the database, they see the update on the website. You could do that with Ajax, but usually what you do is you set it on a timer, right? You'd say, well, every 5 seconds, 30 seconds, minute, go to the database, see if the data is, if you want to, see if the data is different, then send it back. Or you could just send it back anyway and then compare it on client side. But that's a lot of HTTP requests that might not be needed, and that'll just load. It'll make your website a little bit slower and could hurt your bandwidth usage. So Firebase again creates that socket connection. So anytime the database or Firebase in this case changes, everyone looking at your website will get that update automatically. Make sense? Cool. And again, in this case with the admin, I really don't want them to see what's going to change as you're typing out the changes. So I want to update that manually as you hit the update notification button. Yeah.
And you said you're using Firebase because some installations don't support WebSockets directly. Is that right? Okay.
So to install WebSockets onto any server requires a lot of server work. So basically, it's not an out-of-the-box thing. WebSockets aren't just something that just come on any LAMP stack shared host. Usually, you have to have a VPS solution or your own box, and you have to set it up that way.
Okay. And do you know if you did have WebSockets supported natively, would you then be subject to that, whatever I'm typing, they see my typos automatically?
No, it's the same thing. It'd be the same thing as I'm doing with Firebase. If you do support it, what you would do is only update it when you want to update it, and that's what the notify, the form does. It runs a function which updates the object. And then on the front end, that's bound to the data. So the front end gets changed as the data gets changed, and the admin only changes the data when you click a button. So on the admin side, you're only updating the data when you want to. On the front end side, it updates anytime the data updates. So there's only one place it's actually bound, not both places. Any other questions for now? Have I lost anyone? I know some people have left, but.
As long as we're paused for questions, I'll just use the time now. So when you set up a Firebase, you know how it gives you like a code that is going to link your application to your specific database?
Yeah.
So is that in there somewhere?
Yeah, it's right here. Well, it's not right here anymore. It's right here. It's online, whatever, 15, 16, this right here. With Angular.
Oh, CC notifications. Okay, I was trying
Yeah.
to find. Okay, got it.
That's the URL. That's like my Firebase, and it's in my code. But yeah, if you have a Firebase account, you're gonna have your own like .com URL to go to. You would just inject that here, and that's all it needs. That's why I like. Again, this is all AngularFire. I like that because it's again just these 2 lines of code, and I'm good to go. It's pretty easy with native JavaScript too. They make it really simple, but this is just one extra level of simplicity for me. Okay, so one more thing I added before we kind of move on from the admin is I created an object at the top called SaveNotify. You can't see it anymore, but I set it to false right off the bat. And I have something that appears in the admin template, and I'll show it to you in a second, that appears every time you hit save, right? So my issue was that I was saving it, and I didn't know if it was actually working because it's JavaScript and Ajax. I'm like, I guess it's working, maybe. And I didn't have the front end done yet, and you won't either at this point. So you won't actually be able to see it unless you have Firebase open. I was like, well, there has to be some UI component to that where if I hit save, there's like something to show up. So what I did was I used just a scope object. I set it to true, and when it's true, it shows updating ... and then a timeout function of 500 milliseconds, which will then send it back to false, and that little thing will go away. Really not necessary by any means, but it was confusing me that I didn't know it was being updated or not. So right here, where'd it go? There. So underneath the notification settings, right here, it should say, it's not connected to anything right now, but I get the console log of updating, and it'll say, saved at the end. Right now, it's not connected to anything, so even if it does show up, it'll show up for like a split second and then be gone. All right, let's move on to the front end. What do you mean?
Yeah, does Angular have a way of, I don't know, making like a global store like somewhere else where the saved text is somewhere else and then you bind it into the view, almost like you point to a variable instead?
Yeah, so I could have in my scope like another scope variable, like scope.saveText or whatever,
Yeah.
and that'll equal a string of whatever I want it to be. And then I could just inject that into here with the Angular templating.
Oh, okay, so Angular has its own templating that's not like Mustache or something like that?
It's similar to Mustache, so basically let's say I had let's say I did have that, I would just do, notify.saveText, right? And that's how it would work. And then in my app, I would have to I'd have to store that somewhere, right? So part of the notify object, I'd have to have save text, and that would be your text string for when it's saving. I wouldn't, if you're going to do this, I wouldn't make it part of the notify app because the notify app goes to Firebase, and you don't need it to go to Firebase. So you can create something else, like you can go to the top here, the controller, and just do scope.saveText equals saving. And then I could just do save text. Yeah. That's a good point. All right. So let's get into the front end. So the front end is already injected. So we have the app running there. Someone's phone on? It's weird. Okay, so now I have the front end going. I'm going to go ahead and go to live notify. Don't need that, don't need that, don't need that. All right, here's the front end. So it's over there somewhere. All right, so here's the front end. So we've injected the app into the footer, right? So I've showed you that line of code already, and the directive is there. But the directive is loading this template. And all I'm going to do is have a row, ng-show. So ng-show is another Angular HTML attribute thing. It's really cool. It allows you to show and hide things based on something in Angular, like a variable in Angular. Basically to say that when something is in this case, when notify.active equals 1, show this thing. So it'll actually display, I think by default it's inline block or block, but it'll just display it. And then if notify.active is anything but 1, it'll make sure that it's hidden. Again, great when you're dealing with Angular and its way of communicating in JavaScript directly. You can turn things off and on very quickly and show things very quickly. I have a boilerplate on my GitHub for an Angular single-page application for an admin screen. So like if you have your own plugins or themes and you want to create a single-page application for the settings, I do a lot of like form stuff with ng-show. So like if some setting is this, then show something else because it's directly related. If it's not, then don't show it. The model, the variable can equal whatever, a blank string if it's not not relevant. But that way, certain form fields are not there based on some other variable in your scope. It's pretty cool and it makes life a lot easier. In the past with jQuery or JavaScript, you'd have to do all these lines of code to say, okay, if when you change the input field, get the input field value you just changed, and then show these other form fields, right? In this case, it's just this little piece of HTML, and it will show and hide based on that one variable. And in this case, it'll only show it if it equals 1. I was showing you the HTML kind of templating for Angular. This is it right here. It uses the double curly brackets that are pretty common with JavaScript templating. Basically, it's double curly brackets, and then you have access to your whole scope. So anything that's $scope in Angular, you have access to. Typically, you're only going to show strings. So in this case, I need to show my text. The text is what's being saved in the admin, and it also goes to Firebase. So right here, it just shows it. I wanted an H3 tag. I added in some columns and some extra text. CSS, just so I have access to the styling. All right. This is where things get really cool and simple. Unlike before when I had basically just a console log that says here, now I have a notify object, which is empty right off the bat. I'm going to connect to the same Firebase URL. So what I did between the last step and this step is I went ahead and just created a global thing. Because I said, okay, I'm going to be using this Firebase URL a couple times, so I can change it in one place. I'll show it to you in a second. So Firebase URL, sync object, which is the object you just got from Firebase, and then bind to scope notify. Basically, get this object from Firebase, sync it up, and then bind it to scope.notify. And that's it. That's 3 lines of code, and now anyone looking at your website has a WebSocket connection to Firebase and that object. Basically, anytime Firebase changes from now on, anyone who's viewing your website will automatically get that update. We were talking about the AJAX earlier. Now you don't even need to make an AJAX call. Now it's completely bound together, and as you change the Firebase data, your users are going to see the change. All right, so here, sorry I didn't see it from the WordPress toolbar, but here, now it's working. All I did was another gulp just so I can build out the files again. And my front end is working now. It'll work with the back end because we just did the back end stuff. And I have the text I have. And again, I'm using the same exact Firebase domain. So it's always going to be the same at this point. And theoretically, it should work. So let's try it out. I'm going to minimize this window. All right. So congratulations at this point. If you're following along, you now have a live notification system. It should turn off. Yeah, so it'll turn off and turn on. So very, very basic. Turn on a live banner, turn off a live banner, and your text. Good to go. So I was like, all right, that's all I really need to show these people. I'm good. I'm going home now. But it's only been like an hour and a little bit, and I still have another hour to talk, so all right, let me do some more. All right, 30. Wait, how much time do I have? Thank you. So we're going to go to the next step, which is step 4, front-end styling. So all I did in this step was just some CSS. And again, I'm a horrible, horrible designer. So this is what I came up with. At first, when I was asking my WP Crowd members, I was like, what kind of notifications do you really need? And I realized that most of them are in Florida. And they're like, hurricanes. I'm like, what's a hurricane? They're like, those things that come and people need to leave for. I'm like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And you might want to notify people, about a hurricane coming would be good. But anything, really any notification you might have. But I figured hurricane important, nice red, people will see it. The only other thing I did really was has a fancy animated scroll thingy now. I was super impressed by this when I first learned how to do this. And since I have how much? 30 minutes, right? 29. I'll show you guys how to do this really quick. It's pretty cool. CSS allows you to do this thing called transitions. And all I did was I said, and it allows you to actually specify, okay, I only want to transition, let's say, one property of CSS. In this case, I said, whatever, let's just transition on anything. So it transitions on all at 0.5 seconds. And when it's active, the height would be 60 pixels with 20 pixels of padding top and bottom. And it takes 0.5 seconds to do it. So basically all you need for that animation, which used to be like jQuery, animate, height, all this JavaScript that you don't need, is now beautiful CSS, and actually runs a lot better. CSS runs on your CPU. No, it runs on your GPU, right? If I'm not mistaken. I think CSS runs on your GPU, JavaScript runs on your CPU. So the animation is actually going to be a lot better if you're doing something very simple with CSS. Oh, the active class. So before, we just had like on-off. And I was like, okay, well, we need to add a class for that. That's something I can talk about. So before it was just ng-show. And I was like, okay, cool. ng-show shows and hides, but it's not really doing much more than that. So there's this, again, I'm going to say cool a lot more, but there's this really cool attribute called ng-class. And it allows you to actually specify a CSS class as your Angular objects are changing. So as your JavaScript data is changing, you could have different CSS show up, different CSS classes show up, and then change your CSS to go along with that. So in this case, I said, if notify active equals 1, make it active. In any other scenario, it's going to be inactive. So as soon as you turn on your notification, that active class shows up. It's just from inactive class. And then because of my CSS, and I added the height, it does that nice little 0.5 second transition down. This is really familiar if you guys are familiar with jQuery, to toggle class, where you can toggle one class for another. Basically just saying if the scope object active is 1, go ahead and just add the active class.
Yeah, can you use those brackets within the ng class, so if you wanted to check if something from your model has changed, that it toggles the class?
So notify.active is from my model, or from my controller. It's my scope object. So typically, anytime you're doing Angular and you're doing this HTML, anytime you're in an ng dash something, you're kind of in a JavaScript format already. Like it knows, okay, this is like JavaScript text, basically. And you don't need to do the brackets anymore. So I could put in, if notify.text equals something, then, add this other class, right? The brackets are only there when you're in the middle of HTML, because it doesn't think, okay, no, I need to do some. If you just put like notify text without the brackets, you'll just see notify.text. The brackets are there for HTML templating. Anytime you're in an ng dash whatever attribute, it just knows, okay, this is JavaScript. You have access to your scope object, and you're good to go.
Gotcha.
Make sense? Yeah. Cool. Any other questions right now? All right, continue. All right, so the last step that I wanted to add in was actually custom data. So let's say, why isn't that working? All right, so let's say text and on-off is just, you need more than that. And you're like, okay, well, I need, and in this case I said, what if you had to categorize your notification, right? Some notifications are going to be a little more important than others, so you might want to change the CSS and the styling based on it. So extra data can come in handy really easily. And it's really simple. We're going to go to our JavaScript file again. And do absolutely nothing, because you don't have to do anything. The object is already synced with Firebase, so as soon as you add more data into it, that same object that goes to Firebase, Firebase will have it, and it'll end up on your front end. That was a lot simpler than I thought it would be. On the admin side, though, you do have to add in, what you want to actually change. So on this side, in the HTML template, all I did was add in a new select drop down here, and I had the ng model as type, and I didn't need to do any of this before, but okay, now I have type, and I can say, here are all the values for type, and as soon as I hit save, that'll automatically go to Firebase. You could set up a default if you want to. Because I know that it's going to be there in Firebase, I'm not setting up any defaults. I'm just saying, just grab what's in. I just grab what's in on Firebase, and that's it. But you could set up a default if you want to start with that. So I created a couple ones: weather, security, class of registration, and then other. And then I went back to my front end template. And I have one thing here, it's right here, which is within that H3, which just had the text originally, I have a span for notification type, and I say, okay, if it's not other, just spit out the type. So, if it's weather, it'll say weather, colon, your weather warning. So let's check that out. Thank you, whoever has changed my Firebase. There, much better. So for weather, you'll see that I have it as blue. For security, if I switch it, changes it to red and white. Basically, what I did here was I did the same thing as before, except this time I needed to make it on the whole container. I wanted to put it into that template, but it was a little bit harder to do it. So I had to go back into the main plugin file right here. And in class, for that main container, I used my double brackets, and I just did notify.type. I don't need an ng class in this case. I could use ng class. I just said, okay, let's just spit out whatever the type is. And that just adds a class to the whole container. So from there, you can just say, okay, if it's weather, change the background to light blue and the color to 444. So now you have extra data that just got added in. The data then, that piece of data, which is a string, gets added to a CSS class, which now I can change the styling on based on the type. Does anyone have any other data that you might need for a notification system that I can just run through? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a good one. So I'm going to do the link because it's easier, but that's a really good one. Yeah, wait for my next update. It'll be on my next push. So I'm going to go into my admin, and I'm going to write, just have a foreign group. And I'm going to put an input type text ng model equals, and it's going to be notify.link, and placeholder is some URL. That's all we really need. I'm going to go into my front end, and after the H3, I'm going to do a div ng show notify.link, which is the same exact model, same exact variable. And I can do a. I think with this, it's going to be better to do the href of this. So notify.link, some link. And you could add more. So like if you had a link with the URL and you also wanted link text, you would just do 2 of those.
Does Angular have its own client-side routing system?
Yeah, it does. So originally in the Angular, when I defined it, I included ng resource. Ng resource is the built-in, no, resource, sorry, that's grabbing, that's for data grabbing or API usage. Yeah, it has a built-in router. So if you want multi-views, you just use that router. But if you want a good router, find the project called UI router. It's a much better routing system, and it's kind of a project outside of Angular. I'm not sure if it's compatible with Angular 2 yet, but it's a much better system. It's actually a state-driven one. It's a little bit cooler. A little more complex out of the box, but much more powerful. It's called UI router. I have an error in my code. All right. So I forgot to put a label on that. Let's put a label on it. All right, so the easiest way to do this is I just added that to the HTML, right? I didn't do any real JavaScript work at all. What I would do is open up my Firebase, and just to verify, I want to make sure that it's there. So I put in that new link for the URL, the new input field. I then just hit update notification. So I haven't done any extra JavaScript at this point. But I went over to my Firebase, and I was like, and I looked, and it's there already. So I know that it's working, and I didn't have to do anything else. The last bit of it is going to be the client side. So on the front end, I've already done this. So hopefully, some link. Didn't work. I think you can just do href. Yep. So you should use ng.h-href more often, because as you're updating, it's better to use the Angular ng things because it updates better that way. But if you're fine with a static thing, then you can just use href with the curly brackets. I use the documentation a lot, so as much as you might think I know Angular, usually the documentation's open in another tab. But yeah, so I just use href. So I have time check. 20 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to show you guys. It's pretty much done. I can go home now. It's really hot here. Question?
So yeah, I run, among other things, Stanford's emergency site when we have emergencies. And I could imagine it would be nice to offer a service to the other 230,000 websites that are .stanford.edu sites to allow them to get emergency notifications. How much of this, most of those are not WordPress sites, how much of this can I chunk out and say, here, if you want this, include this on your website? And do they need Angular? Do they need Firebase,
So you could have one, like if you're going to use Firebase, you could have one Firebase for all your websites, because it's all going to get the same data, let's say, unless you want customized data, in which case you could have either multiple Firebase accounts, or what I would do is just have another object level, so you have two objects and it knows which one to get. But yeah, if they're looking at the same Firebase object, then yeah, they'll all need Angular to do the application part, but everything I've done is just inject HTML and JavaScript into WordPress. None of it was actually WordPress specific. So yeah, you could take all of that code, put it somewhere else with the JavaScript, and you'd be good to go. The PHP stuff is even pretty trivial because it's just injecting HTML and loading up JavaScript. There's really not much more PHP than that.
But for their payload, they would have to include AngularJS on every page of their website.
Any page that they want the notification. So like if there's certain pages that, let's say you only want it on your home page, or let's say top level pages, then you can say, okay, only inject Angular and this HTML when it's, this page. Think of it like people enqueue JavaScript when you're using their shortcode. Like you're gonna have a shortcode will enqueue some JavaScript, but it only enqueues it when you're using the shortcode. Same kind of concept. If you need to have the notification, then you would include the HTML and the JavaScript, the Angular, and AngularFire are the only two really things you need.
Yeah. I'm worried about Firebase pricing, fortunately 364 days a year we don't have an emergency. And then on the one day that we do, there's, 250,000 hits. So I don't know how.
So with Firebase, what I did have an application running on it before, which ran my whole application. And I had it off until our users hit that amount. Then I would turn it on, and I'd pay for the only, let's say the day that I had it. And then I turn it off when I didn't need it anymore. So I would do either that, or again, if you're a large enough team, there's definitely custom solutions out there that you could just build. Again, a lot of NPM stuff, a lot of Node stuff that just does this kind of stuff out of the box. So you could communicate with that directly. I'll try to put up code. I have a socket project laying around that I was working on that was pretty simple, but it was basically just it was a basic text chat, but it was all live in socket based, and it was just on Node. But it doesn't mean that couldn't communicate with WordPress on another server.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How does Firebase count hits in context of charging you, and when somebody makes a socket connection, is it charging you a hit every millisecond? Is it
No, just every time it makes a connection. It's a connection based thing.
Okay.
Every time it makes a connection, then that counts as one. So let's say everyone on your campus connected one time and then never again, then they just stayed connected and their laptops were just always on and running your website. Theoretically, you could just then go back to the free version because you're not going to get any new connections.
Okay. So, yeah, this could
Pretty
be
rare,
trouble.
but
I feel like a lot of people have, Stanford, was it? A lot of people have websites all over the place, 20,000 connections in a day that, it'd probably be useful to toggle that on and off.
Yeah, so I think with Firebase, you can just turn it on and off as you need it. But the connection, yeah, it's connection based. It's not if I'm on the website, it's not continuously adding connections. Once I'm connected, I'm connected. Any other questions? Yeah.
What steps would you think, I know this would be a whole nother class, but to secure and enable some kind of logging for something like this?
For updating the
If you have
notification?
multiple users that have access to do that, just to be able to see who changed it to what when.
You could do that with you could do that with WordPress. There's a lot of WordPress trackers that allow you to log as people log in, what are they doing within the admin. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess I just haven't really ever done any customization like that. Would it just be a hook into?
Yeah. So if you want to do it specifically for just this plugin, what you could do is, let's say on the update, right? On the update, fire some other command. This is where the REST API would come in handy. To the REST API, you could, let's say, have a log, a custom post type, which is a log, where that would take down, who's the currently logged in user, and then all the data that goes along with it. You could even see you could even save essentially what was the message, what did they change it to. That's again another layer that you get on top of it, and that could tie into the same JavaScript and run every time they hit update. They would just grab whoever's logged in and all the data that they've changed or whatever they're doing. There's already log plugins out there that do that, a lot of that. So, but that would be more site-wide.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for now?
I'm just curious what other potential applications you have heard of or can think of that might use a kind of socket-based solution like Firebase other than notifications.
Really any live data. I mean, I've had the same like question posed upon myself. Like I'm like, cool, I built this cool socket thing. What do I do with it now? And I've gotten as far as a text chat, and I'm like, text chats exist already. What else? But you could use that to do anything. Like let's say some data changes on Firebase, right, or in the WebSocket, and it comes back and you say, okay, this data has changed, but now I could run a JavaScript function, or I could do some other functionality that relates to that. Going back to the REST API, you could say, hey, if something changes on the WebSocket data, create a new post with whatever data that you want to log as a logger or something like that. Or you could do something else with WordPress through the REST API every time the data changes. But I would say, yeah, you could create a callback function that does something anytime the data changes, whether it's something specific or just anytime it changes. I'm trying to think of any other good use cases for it.
Sorry, you said you could use the REST API to defined anytime the data changes. So, like the WordPress REST API or the Firebase REST API?
WordPress REST API, sorry.
So, okay, so every time you save it, then you
yeah. So like your data in Angular is your data in Angular is bound to Firebase's, right? So anytime Firebase updates, the Angular data updates. But there's callback functions for that. You could say like on change, right? Run some other function, and your JavaScript function in Angular could potentially post to the WordPress REST API and create a new post with some data in it. I mean, you could do that too, right? You could say anytime there's a new post, run a JavaScript function or something that updates the Firebase data, which might then put up your banner and say, hey, new post, click a link, right? You could do something like that, which is not a bad idea for WP Crowd. I should do that. Any other questions? So I have some resources that I want to share. If you're into Angular and you like what you saw, I have an Angular theme on GitHub. It's basically a single page application that has two or three views, basically a list page and a detail page. So like all your latest blog posts and then a blog post detail page, and I think a page view. It's a good place to just get started going with Angular and WordPress and the REST API. I started that theme in a couple years back before the API existed, but I wanted to learn Angular. So that's how I learned it. I created my own theme around it. Then the API came out, and I learned more and more about Angular and how to make it better. I also have a plugin called AngularJS for WordPress. It's actually also in the WordPress repo. You can just download it directly from your backend. And it sets up a lot of the Angular stuff already. So it injects Angular, it injects factories and stuff like that. So it's a good place to just, if you want to have a stepping stone and you already know a little bit of Angular, it might be a good place to just install the plugin. You'll have access to these factories already, and you can kind of go on creating from there. Other awesome resources, WP Crowd. We do a lot of blogging on all sorts of stuff, but anytime I blog on there, it's usually development related. We'll talk a lot about that in our podcasts and our video casts. So feel free to watch some of our older videos. We have an excellent series going on right now called Level Up as a Developer, basically going from entry-level developer to, let's say, a high-end developer. How do you get there? What are some obstacles? How do you avoid those obstacles or get through them? Some really good talks that we've had already. WP API on GitHub and the repository. Obviously, I didn't use it today, but I use it for everything, so check it out. My website, roysivan.com. If you go to /blog, that's where I blog on when I have a chance. Josh Pollock, who's right there, he talks a lot about Angular and the API and things like that. So definitely check out his website. And then Josh and I both write on TorqueMag, and there's some awesome articles on there as good resources. That's it. Thank you.